Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I must first pay tribute to those people who are providing simultaneous translation of what I hope is good English into what is good Polish. The last time I was here in Poland was in 2007 as your honored guest for the dedication of the memorial in Poznan to your cryptologists. I'm very honored to be here today and see you again. Thank you. I hope that the few technical challenges we had earlier today about my presentation have been resolved. Otherwise, it will be very short, but maybe that would also be good. We've had a very interesting journey so far today from those early days of the Polish code-breaking exercises through into the derivative works that were undertaken at Bletchley Park. And I'm going to take us on the last stage of that journey through some of the final machines that were built at Bletchley Park, and in particular the Colossus that Dermot referred to, and how that moves us on to electronic computing. I don't know how to work this machine, but I'll try. That's good. I will try and explain why these machines were built, and a little about the people that designed them. Because cryptology is not just about the machine, it's about the people, and it's about the skill of the people undertaking the design and the skill of the people undertaking the cryptanalytic process that the machines help. I'm going to explain some of the new things that we saw in these machines and what happened to them after the war, because there are many things said, some of which are true and some of which aren't. And then I'm going to try and talk about where that left us in the development of modern computing. So why were these machines built? Well, much has been told of the story of Enigma, and I think we can say that Enigma has come of age. When more than one Hollywood film has been made about the Enigma, I think we can consider it to be well known amongst the population, even when many of those or some of those films are not fantasy, but are clearly not necessarily completely factually accurate. The story of these machines comes from a challenge, and the challenge was the move from the tactical cryptography of the Enigma to the strategic cryptography of machine-generated ciphers. And if we can just play the audio, please. So some of the audience are already decoding this Morse, I can see. What you're listening to is what an interceptor would hear of Enigma traffic. This is 5-letter groups being transmitted over the air, and this Morse would be written down by interceptors sitting in intercept stations. Without those interceptors, there would be no work at Bletchley. Without those people writing down very difficult Morse in difficult atmospheric conditions, this marvelous cryptologic factory at Bletchley Park would have had no work. It is very important that we remember the contribution they make. But they could not work on very easily at Bletchley on some of the more sophisticated codes, and we'll talk more about those now. Towards the latter stage of the war, it became clear that the Germans would want a much more powerful machine that would be able to be used for their strategic communications. And Gerhard Grimson of the Lorenz company was successful in producing the machines known as the SZ40 and the SZ42. These machines were substantially more complex than the Enigma. They were an extraordinary machine to be built, and actually very elegant. Grimson decided to use an encipherment method originally developed by Gilbert Van Am in 1918, I think, the Van Am encipherment, And for the sake of brevity today, I shall not go into the mathematics of this in great detail, but the great advantage of the Van Oom encipherment is you take your plain text code and you exclusive OR it with what is called a key stream. And it has the great feature that if you take the ciphertext and then XOR it with the same key stream, you come back to the original plain text. It's a very simple and very elegant mechanism. But what was necessary for Grimson was to find a way to generate this key stream of bits. And that is what he did within his machines. And so towards the latter part of the war, suddenly there was a new signal that was being heard by those interceptors. And it was not a signal that they had heard before. And this is what it sounded like. Can we play the audio? Well, it was louder than this, I assure you. Can we play the audio? So if you are proficient in reading Morse, this is impossible. So how do you read this? Well, I don't have time to show you the wonderful machines that were used, but they were like a small pen recorder. The pen would move on moving tape, and it would show the impulses that were being received here. And they were then read by Lorenz from the Royal Naval Reserve, the Royal Navy, who would read these slips of tape by eye, and they would then be punched onto paper tape. Another extraordinary feat, an incredible capability for these women to read these papers. That signal that you heard was actually rebroadcast in 2007 from our friends at the Heinz-Nixdorf Museums Forum in Paderborn in Germany, when we actually reran an exercise with an original Lorenz machine, and I'll talk more of that later. So the British called this new system FISH, and by the end of the war there was a substantial network of FISH traffic, and each of these links was called by the British by different names. And this was the machine. Now, nobody at the Code Breaking Centre at Bletchley Park had ever seen a Lorenz cipher machine until after the war. This particular machine was used by Field Marshal Kesselring, was recovered after the war, returned to Bletchley Park, and it is said that some of the cryptographers looked at the machine and said, "Oh yes, that's right. That's the machine, yes." I pay tribute to Dr. Craig Sawyers, who at the National Museum of Computing completely restored this machine to working order, and that is the machine that was used in 2007. It is a very elegant machine. Unlike the Enigma that contained either 3 or 4 rotors, this machine contains 12. The complexity of this machine is staggering. When we first looked at it and we took it apart, there were some interesting surprises. I was expecting to find, for example, metric bolts inside. No, it is American threads. I don't know why. It's an amazing, beautiful machine. Now, what's interesting is how this machine works. You recall that it has to create this key stream, and it creates the key stream by using these small tabs on the side of the rotors that can either be in or out. Now here, that one is out, this one is in. And those tabs operate some levers inside the machine, and those levers then connect through to the underside of these switches. So as those rotors move round, those tabs that are out cause these levers to operate and operate these switches and produce the key stream. So there are two challenges in this machine. First, we have to find where the tabs are, and second, we have to find the start position for the wheels. Cryptographically, extraordinarily complex. The British had not seen a machine, they had merely heard this traffic. And it is great credit to those interceptors who, of course, were very used to listening to traffic on Enigma, and they realized the importance of what they were listening to. They discovered one particular message that they thought was important, and it was this message. And in summary, we believe it was sent between Athens and Vienna, and an operator of the Lorenz machine sent a long message, a very long message. And when it was received at the other end, the response came back that said, "I'm sorry, I did not get that. Please, can you send it again?" Now, clearly, he was a little upset at this. And so when he sent the message the second time, he did two things that he shouldn't have done in combination. Firstly, he reset his Lorenz machine to exactly the same settings as the first message. Should not be a problem if he had sent exactly the same message. But he didn't. He sent a shorter version of the message where he abbreviated some important words. The original message started Spruchnummer 9. The shortened message, the second message, went Spruch NR 9. And so when the second message was received, it was about 400 characters shorter than the first message. And this gave some extraordinary cryptologists at Bletchley Park a view into this Lorenz machine. John Tiltman was an extraordinarily gifted cryptologist, and he saw the benefit of these two messages and sought to try and recreate the key stream, because without the key stream, any further cryptanalysis would not be possible. And he gave this task to somebody called Bill Tutt. Bill Tutt was a chemistry graduate from Cambridge that had joined Bletchley Park, and Tutt sat down to try and recreate the architecture of the Lorenz machine just from that split short message. Now, I just want you to think about how challenging that must be. He has never seen a machine. He has an idea about the encipherment. Tiltman tells him he's fairly sure that it is Vernam encipherment. And now Tutt has to think, theoretically, how would I construct a machine that would produce those sorts of results? Now, I'm going to introduce you in this video clip, the next video clip, to Captain Jerry Roberts. Jerry spent some time working with Bill Tutt. Jerry was the last surviving member of the testery. There were two very important parts of Bletchley Park, the testery, which were linguists and cryptographers who did a lot of work breaking ciphers by hand, and the numery, which spent its work then on machine breaking. Jerry has been a great help to us at the Museum of Computing. He sadly passed away last year. He explained to us, and many of us are very keen and interested in the machines, but Jerry made it very clear to us that we also needed to understand about the people. And he told very interesting stories of the people. I was very fortunate to meet him on many occasions. And when he was the last surviving member, I said to him, Jerry, it must be difficult for you as the last member of the testery when all of your colleagues have now died. To what do you attribute your long life? And he said, my dear boy, every day I try and have something to do tomorrow. When I have nothing to do tomorrow, then I will die. Last year at his memorial service, someone said, sadly, Jerry didn't have anything to do today. It's a testament. This man has done more to increase the profile of many people, including Alan Turing, Bill Tutt, Tommy Flowers, and others at Bletchley Park than anybody else, and it's a tribute to him, and I'm privileged to have met him. In this next video, which I hope my colleagues behind this mysterious wall doing the simultaneous translation, you can't see them. I don't know how many of them there are in there. I'm guessing about 300. I think that you should have a transcript of this. Jerry is difficult to hear, so let's see. Please, can we play the video?
Bill Tutt was a fine mathematician.
Can we make it louder, please?
Great character. He worked on this problem for 2.5 months. Can you imagine yourself working on the same problem
Louder?
for 2.5 months? In the early stages, it must have been quite heartbreaking. But as he gradually came to have more understanding, it must have been a great triumph for him. And I was actually working in the same office as he was for a lot of that time. And I saw the patience and persistence he used. I can still remember him staring into the middle distance and twiddling his pencil. And I used to wonder whether he was getting anything done. My goodness, he was. One commentator has called it the outstanding mental feat of last century. Not the war, last century. And it was an amazing thing to do.
Jerry paying tribute to the work of Bill Tutt. Bill is one of several people who lived their lives almost in obscurity after their work at Bletchley. And it's a great tragedy that they are only now being properly celebrated. Tutt drew this picture. This was Tutt's analysis of the Lorenz cipher machine. 12 rotors, 12 wheels. K wheels, what he called K wheels and S wheels, and M wheels that were motor wheels. And the relative primality of the numbers of teeth. This is back to a point that Dermot raised about Alan's work with machines with prime numbers on cogs. Here we are again. Through this diagram, people were able to understand the Lorenz machine. And it came from Tutt sitting there for 2.5 months, as Jerry said, sometimes looking into space and twiddling his pencil and coming up with this. And it was correct. Extraordinary. Today, Bill Tutt has a memorial in Newmarket in the UK that was unveiled last year, and rightly so. So, cryptology in this machine age is not just about machines, it's about people. So now they knew the architecture of the Lorenz machine and how this key stream was created. Members of the testery in which Jerry worked were able to use hand methods to decipher Lorenz traffic. So they were using hand methods, not machine-assisted methods, but hand methods. And typically it would take them 6 or 7 days to decipher one of these messages. And these were strategic messages of a strategic importance. So much so that sometimes after 6 days, a lot of the intelligence had been lost. But it was clear that it would be valuable to have a machine to assist in this process. And enter Max Newman. Max commissioned, Max had an idea, and you will hear from him in just a moment, about creating a machine that would help with this. And he commissioned the first machine that was called Heath Robinson from TRE. And he's talking in this next clip about it. Now, I want you to remember that this next clip from Newman was taken in the early 1980s. The full story of the Lorenz machines and the Colossus was not declassified until the early 2000s. So in this next clip that we will see, Newman is being very circumspect, and you can see him thinking carefully before he speaks about what he had designed. And with him is also one of the cryptanalysts, Jack Good. In this picture, sorry, I forgot, in this picture, you can see the reconstruction here of the Heath Robinson machine on the right-hand side. This is being reconstructed at the National Museum of Computing. It is here. This is the classic thing called the bedstead. I'll talk more of that in a moment. And on the far side here, actually, is a thing called the Tunney machine. And Tunney is also important because what they had to understand at Bletchley Park was if they could break these wheel settings and start positions, then they needed to decrypt the traffic. And so they produced a machine that completely emulated the Lorenz machine, and they called it Tunney. It didn't look anything like a Lorenz machine. In fact, it looked rather like a telephone exchange, but it did the job, and that is the Tunney machine. This is it here. This is the reconstruction of the Tunney machine, and this is a wartime picture. So let's move on and play the video of Newman explaining about these machines.
They had got out some of the messages by a very slow hand process, by comparing certain runs of things with each other, by a process which it seemed to me was an imitation of what the machine was doing on the other side that enciphered it. And it occurred to me that that we should be able perhaps to make a machine which would imitate theirs and, as it were, do the work for us. The first outcome was a single machine which was operated by a few wrens and was called by them Robinson, after Heath Robinson.
It was called the Heath Robinson, of course, after the well-known artist who used to draw machines that were made of sealing wax and string. And sometimes we thought that Heath Robinson was like that. It would tend to go up in flames from time to time. Not quite as bad, but you could smell the smoke coming out and you'd switch it off. The equipment was not very good, and it didn't lead to very much success. Its main value was in showing that the statistical methods were useful, so that the later, much more efficient machine, the Colossus, was designed with some confidence that it would be useful.
So we hear there in Jack Good's words about the statistical methods. And here we are back to our mathematics, because the techniques that were used to break the Lorenz cipher machine, using these machines, using Heath Robinson and others, were statistical methods, mathematical methods developed through the assistance of Alan Turing, the mechanization through the work of the Newmanry and others. And that first machine that they produced demonstrated that these statistical methods could be successful. Unfortunately, Heath Robinson was unreliable and was prone to make smoke. But Newman commissioned Tommy Flowers from the Post Office Research Centre to build the next generation machine. Flowers was an amazing engineer, and Flowers had an idea that he could actually make a machine that was electronic to do this, using valves. There had been a lot of lessons in the war about the use of valves in radar and other areas, and Flowers believed that he could use valves. Not everybody believed him. Flowers was a very understated man. He was very quiet and very capable, and he led an amazing team. And in this video, which is the last video I'll show, is a video again made in the early 1980s, where Flowers describes, in very mundane terms, the building of a machine that changed the outcome of the war. Can we play the video, please, with loud?
The task of designing and building the new machine, Colossus, was given to the then Post Office Research Establishment at Dollis Hill. T.H. Flowers was the engineer in charge of the project.
This at the time was our AC Bridge laboratory, and it was where we assembled the first Colossus. By that time, the problems and processing involved in code breaking had become so complicated that the mechanical switches and relays which we were using were neither fast enough nor reliable enough to be useful. It occurred to me that electronic equipment, including valves, could be made to do the same functions as mechanical switches, very much faster and more reliably, and that this would solve our problems. I made suggestions on these lines, which were not at first received very favourably, because it was known and believed from radar and radio experience that valves were not very reliable and not reliable enough. But we knew from our pre-war researchers not only how to use valves and electronic equipment which would perform the same functions as mechanical switches, but also that if they were left undisturbed, were not moved about, and were not switched on and off, but were left on continuously, that they could be very reliable. So that when we contemplated using 2,000 valves or more in one piece of equipment, we were pretty confident that it would be satisfactory. So we went ahead and made one, and that was the first Colossus.
As master of understatement, I suggested the use of valves. It was not universally received well. Many people told him he was mad, but he pressed on anyway. And he said, and so we tried it, and we built the first Colossus. And they built the first Colossus at a very important period in the war, where this Colossus was necessary, and they built it in 10 months from start to finish. And in another marvelous piece of understatement, this is an extract from Tommy Flower's diary. I'll read some elements to you. It says at the top here, January 1944, Sunday the 16th. Worked in office 10 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. Had to sleep here because of fog. Now, of course, in Britain we always know the weather, and in those days it was foggy. Made Colossus work. Just an entry in his personal diary. Made Colossus work. Next day, took John, Celia and Eileen to Peter Pan. So took the children to see a show. Next day, Colossus delivered to BP. What a marvellous piece of history that we see from his personal diary. And when that machine arrived, it was immediately successful. And it started the break into the Lorenz machine in a much more efficient way than ever before. This was a machine called the Colossus Mark I, and the features of it include here a thing called the bedstead, and on this bedstead is mounted the cipher text going round and round. Unlike the Heath Robinson that had two bedsteads, one for the cipher text and one for the key stream, Flower's idea here was to synthesize the key stream electronically through those valves, 2,500 valves. And I'll tell you a little story later about what happens with 2,500 valves and wrens, the women operators, standing next to it in the summer in a room with no windows. Here are some more pictures of the installations. I think this is Colossus number 9, I think, installed at Bletchley Park. As soon as the first Colossus went into service and reduced the time taken to break the Lorenz machine cipher from about 6 days to 6 hours, they immediately ordered more. And by the end of the war, there were 10 Colossi in operation at Bletchley Park. Here's an interesting version that has two bedsteads, and this was so that as soon as they had been successful with one set of ciphertext, they were already loading the next ciphertext on the second bedstead to keep the machine running. And Flower's idea of reliability, of course, was that you never turned it off, and so they were extremely reliable. So what happened to them? Now, I realize I'm short of time, so I'm just going to condense this last part down as quickly as I can. Well, what happened to these machines? We do know that After the war, it was requested that these machines not be broken. That's a classic story, is that they were broken up and put in a hole. That was not the case. These machines were made of standard parts from telephone exchanges. Flowers worked for the post office, and the parts that were used were valuable to the UK that at that time was technically bankrupt. So the machines were dismantled, and those parts of those machines probably went back into telephone exchanges. Apart from two machines. Two machines went to Eastcote. Eastcote was the headquarters of what became GCHQ, and those machines remained in operation until the 1960s. Maybe in the Q&A we can have a further discussion. But the story was secret for so long until the 2000s. Tony Sale and a team of people decided they would rebuild a Colossus. They started in 1993. Remember that the first Colossus had been built in about 10 months. It took Tony and his team 13 years to rebuild it. They started with 8 photographs and some fragments of circuit diagrams. That is all they had, nothing more. Here's an example of one of the circuit diagrams showing the valves. The first thing they had to do was to build the bedstead. A critical part was this optical reader that at the time was really leading edge. Arnold Lynch, on the left-hand side of this picture, designed it in 1942, and he redesigned it again for them when they rebuilt the Colossus. He also presented the project with a piece of a Colossus, which is one of the photocells that is still in use today. So they rebuilt that, and this is the photocells. This was extraordinary at its time, and we did not see photocells in use until much later. And this is the build process. As you can see, it's challenging and complicated, but in 1996, with Tommy Flowers down here, the Duke of Kent switched on the basic working Colossus. Just 2 of the 5 streams working, but just enough to show that it would work. And Tony Sale on the right wanted to do this because Tommy Flowers was in bad health, and he wanted to ensure that Tommy saw this. Work continued, and as you can see, further work here on the Colossus through to the present day. It is an extraordinary beast. And here you see some of the thyrotron rings. No, actually, those are 807s, I beg your pardon. Those aren't thyrotrons. Some of you will be aficionados of valves, 807s. And in 2008, this is how Colossus looked. Completely rebuilt, Colossus Mark II, successfully decoding original Lorenz traffic again. In 2007, our friends at Heinz-Nixdorf Museums Forum transmitted cipher back to us from an original Lorenz machine, the one you saw earlier that we had restored. We sent it to Germany. They transmitted the cipher back, and the Colossus again decided to try and break it. And Colossus did break it. It took the Colossus about 7.5 hours. We made it an open competition as well, and a German, Joachim Schuth, actually broke it as well using a more up-to-date method. He broke it in 1.5 minutes. But the Colossus ran again, and this is the Colossus in 2014 in a new, beautiful gallery, and you are welcome to come and see it. It operates every day. It's a marvelous machine. That tape goes round and reads at 5,000 characters per second. This is an optimal speed for the Colossus. It is synchronous. The faster you run the tape, the faster the Colossus runs. You can run faster than 5,000 characters a second. Unfortunately, physics comes into play, and the tape bursts after too long, but you can run it faster. In fact, there was a whole research project on glue to find a way to glue the tape together reliably. It has 2,500 valves. It's very hot. The Wrens said that in the war, with the windows closed in the summer, very hot, they would strip to their underwear to operate the machine. I do not know if this is true, but it's an interesting story. What did it give us? It gave us programmable electronic computing. And this is the cryptanalyst dream. This machine undertook cryptanalysis with access to ciphertext only. It used mathematical statistical methods. It was synchronous, speed up the tape, speed up the machine, and the optical reader that we saw there did not come back until late 1950s, early 1960s. What's important is the same message that you had here in Poland, which was this inspiration to solve these problems that other people think are impossible. The cryptanalysts in Bletchley were thinking the same way as the cryptanalysts in Poland. Just because people say this is difficult does not mean that we should not try. Colossus gave us more special purpose machines, but it also stimulated the study of computing machines. Newman went on to form the Computer Machine Laboratory and, of course, was joined by Turing. Subsequent machines that were built there, the Baby and the Ferranti 1 and so on, these are seminal machines of general purpose use. Interesting, they're called computing machines because computers were still people. People were people who did computing, computers. Electronics became standard because it was reliable, and there was this drive to general purpose computing. That is the legacy that started here in Poland that takes us through those machines, through the mechanical machines, electromechanical machines, to the electronic machines. That is a wonderful journey, and thank you very much for joining me in that journey.